These stupid board games of all the philosophies that a man can dedicate himself to. But, oh look, I'll never understand it. At least, not without a little bit of divine guidance from the heavens. Faiths and avatars. I know there's something in the index about this. Here, heavens. Boating heaven, bridge heaven, broker heaven, burger heaven, board game heaven. But, no, wait, that's exactly what I need.
Strange. I thought that would be ringing for some reason.
Burger heaven? Yes, I'll have 5 large burgers with double chips and extra griffin.
HeroQuest, the grandmother of all modern dungeon crawlers. Welcome to Board Game Heaven. My name is Raymond, and today I'm taking a look at this classic. And this is, of course, HeroQuest by Hasbro and Avalon Hill.
HeroQuest.
A huge hit in the early 90s, HeroQuest was designed by Stephen Baker and first published in 1989 by Milton Bradley in cooperation with Games Workshop as a sort of an introduction to games like Warhammer and Dungeons & Dragons, but aimed at children and teens. It had a UK release that was translated into many languages in Europe. It was released in Australia and then in 1990 in the US in an updated version with changes made to monster stats, spells, and some missions, making for a more challenging game. It even got a Japanese release, which was quite different from the European and North American editions. Its success was so great, it not only got several expansions like Keller's Keep, Return of the Witch Lord, Against the Ogre Horde, Wizards of Morcar, and in North America the Barbarian Quest Pack called the Frozen Horror and the Elf Quest Pack called the Mage of the Mirror. But it also led to following games that explored the new and exciting dungeon crawler genre such as Advanced HeroQuest, Warhammer Quest, Space Crusade aka Star Quest, and even the early D&D adventure game. It's not the earliest dungeon crawling board game, that could well be the game called Dungeon, which dates back to 1975, but it was one of the best known. It even had several video game versions by Gremlin Interactive on the ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, Amiga, Atari ST, Amstrad, and DOS on PC. There was also a sequel called HeroQuest 2, Legacy of Sorasil, which wasn't as well received as the original. And you may have also owned the HeroQuest sticker album, or the Marvel Comics Winter Special. Today, nostalgia for these games is big. Many collectors search for original copies of HeroQuest and the following board games, and it is surely amazing to be the proud owner of such ancient treasure. For the game is now 35 years old. Feeling old yet? But dungeon crawlers have evolved a lot since those early days of adventuring, and board gamers have been spoiled by numerous fantasy and sci-fi adventure games with amazing miniatures, artwork, and rule sets. So the question is, does HeroQuest still hold up today as a worthwhile gaming experience? Let us explore this question deeper. We all know the fantastic review of HeroQuest by the legendary and incomparable Bard from Bardic Broadcasts, who with his gripping voice and witty dialogue has showed us exactly why HeroQuest is so great, and at the same time also cleverly hinted at some of its flaws.
Will I trip on a flagstone or leap heroically into battle? Let's find out. Well, the best thing about HeroQuest is ignoring the roll to move rule.
Today I will try to show you some aspects of the game that I think are good and some that are bad. The good. The components are great. The second printing of the core box comes in a more compact box than the first crowdfunded printing, which saves space on your shelf. It has trays for all your miniatures, which is much better than the original box. Or those horrid Fantasy Flight inserts. The miniatures themselves are quite good, a big improvement over the original sculpts. Of course, those hold much nostalgia, but if you want that, try to find an original copy if you can. There are still plenty going around. The heroes are the well-known classic party with a barbarian, an elf, a wizard, and a dwarf. The elf in the core box is now a female, which is great, and many HeroQuest enthusiasts have of course done the same with their old copies of the game. The figures have lots of detail and will look amazing when painted, but hold up great out of the box. The plastic is sturdy and allows for great detail, but is bendy enough to prevent easily snapping off weapons, as would often happen with the old figures. Compared to other modern miniature board games, these perhaps aren't the best I've ever seen, but they're definitely high quality sculpts. A big part of this game is the furniture. Actual 3D sculpts for doors both open and closed, bookshelves, cupboards, torture devices, weapon racks, treasure chests, hearths, tables, chairs, altars, and tombs. They have upgraded from part cardboard to full plastic, losing some of the nice art but making them a lot more durable. All these amazing pieces make the game board come alive. Many fans have even added more, going as far as to make entire walls and 3D boards. The dice have also been upgraded from wood to plastic, and they are bigger now too. Speaking of the board, the new edition board is larger than the original, which was just a tad too crowded. The new one allows for more room for miniatures, while still keeping the almost exact look of the original board we all love so much. If you'd like to see all these miniatures and other components in more detail, check out my unboxing videos. Something completely new to this edition is the addition of a digital app. This app allows for fully cooperative gameplay and even solo play without a Zargon player. The app takes the role of Zargon and shows you each quest's introduction and goal, and controls monster movement and attacks. A big plus is the fact that this app is totally optional. You only need it if you want to play fully cooperative or solo, and I really appreciate that, since I dread the day certain apps stop working and I can no longer play the associated game. What if I invested heavily in Mansions of Madness or Journeys in Middle-earth and the app is no longer functional? Your entire collection would be rendered useless. Not so for HeroQuest. I appreciate the option to play this solo or co-op a lot. The artwork is also updated. The box cover is a modernized version of the classic Les Edwards art. For me, nothing beats that, but I understand they probably couldn't just use that and had to make a new cover. And they kept it as true to the original as they could, and that is good enough for me, since it is very much recognizable as the classic game. Has the same feel and promise of high adventure. Many other companies have in fact paid homage to the original Les Edwards cover because of this. Take HeroQuest for example. Maze Games have made a card game where the players are orcs instead of the classic barbarian, wizard, elf and dwarf heroes, turning the tables as it were, and made a cover that reverses all the roles of good guys and bad guys. Not to be confused with the later published HeroQuest Warpath, which is a miniatures game in the same setting also by Maze Games, now owned and published by Monolith Games. The covers from the expansions are again new versions of the classic box covers, making them very recognizable to fans of the original, but with a few subtle changes here and there, mostly to match the new miniature models. The art on the cards is also updated, again staying as true to the originals as possible, made of course by Gary Chalk of Lone Wolf and Talisman fame, but adding some new touches here and there. Hasbro has also made the cards bigger, which is great because now they fit in standard sized card sleeves. The same revamping has been done for the Mentor screen, and indeed this is Mentor on the screen, for he is shown holding Lore Tome, the very tome that holds all the lore from the scenario booklet that he tells the heroes before every mission. He is even pictured on the original hero boards, in the introduction of the new rulebook, and in the HeroQuest Marvel Special. The new screen also has a handy reference on the inside with all the monster stats, which is very convenient and better than the original European screen, which only had a key of all the map elements. They've adopted the European aesthetic of the cards, which I vastly prefer over the plain North American designs, and also use the European format for equipment with new cards instead of the North American armory sheet. Who can forget the broadsword?
I'll use my broadsword.
Or the heroic brew.
And having an equipment card for every item in the game means you can keep it with your hero card for easy reference until used or lost, just like in the first edition of the game. But people have always wondered, does this mean the equipment items in the deck are limited? You acquire an item, take the card, and when that particular card is no longer in the deck, it's no longer available. This made sense. We always ruled that if a hero found an item that was no longer in the deck, they would get the selling cost, which is the value of the item divided by 2. Oddly though, the new rulebook states that the items are always in stock even if a player decides to use the card for quick reference. So they are not limited to the number of unique cards for everything, which was also the case for the original 2nd edition, which had only 1 card of every item in the equipment deck, and the US edition of the game, which used the armory sheet. So why have duplicate cards then? I guess they simply wanted the option to keep those cards for reference, in addition to writing it down on your character sheet. And I don't think there are situations where you have to randomly draw an item from the equipment deck to indicate what you found. So this is possible, but then why are there only 2 long swords and 2 crossbows or battle axes, while 3 of the party members could use them? There are, after all, 3 shields and 3 helmets, because the wizard cannot use those. There's also only 1 toolkit. To me, it would make more sense if the items in the equipment deck were limited to the number of cards, but then you'd need more of everything. So even though I really like the cards, I do think that is a bit of an odd decision. The theme is a huge part of the original success of the game. High fantasy adventure, epic battles, and wondrous magic, all teased on the cover. Who can resist? In a time when games such as Monopoly, The Game of Life, Twister, Mousetrap, Guess Who, and Yahtzee were the staple in many households, a game like HeroQuest offered exciting new gameplay, where you could become a mighty hero and a brave adventurer, fighting monsters and exploring dungeons. I for one wish I owned this as a kid, but I was an only child, so I only found out about the game much later. I knew the commercial, and when I finally found a copy of the original game, I was sold. And even now, fantasy and sci-fi are very popular themes, and new dungeon crawlers are released every year. The new edition also has some differences with the original version, most notably the European version, because the classic North American version also had differences, and that is the version Hasbro has basically reprinted, with a few minor changes. For example, the European version's monsters all had 1 hit point, so if you managed to hit them and deal damage, they were defeated. The North American version had monsters with 2, 3, or even more hit points, so they took more hits to kill. The North American version also had chaos magic in the form of cards, to be used by the Chaos Sorcerer or other villains controlled by the Zargon player. They did adopt the equipment cards from the European edition instead of the North American armory sheet, as I mentioned before. The quests were also copied from the original North American edition, sometimes to a fault, resulting in some oddities here and there, which I will touch on in a bit. You also get reference cards in the new edition, which is great for starting players, and the large character sheets are also replaced by regular cards. HeroQuest is also an easy-to-learn game. It's extremely accessible and as such enjoyable by young and old, experienced or not. This is great, as it opens up the game to a huge potential market. It is also a cooperative game, which I love, because adventuring together, discussing tactics and watching each other's backs is a wonderful way of playing. The mentor player explains the missions and controls Morkar's or Zargon's armies as well, basically playing a double role as helper and adversary. Of course, the goal of the Game Master is not to try and kill all the heroes in devious ways, but to ensure the players are having a great adventure. The key is to try and make the game challenging enough to keep it engaging, but not demoralize the hero players. If the game's too easy, throw in an ambush. If it's too hard and players have lots of bad luck with the dice rolls, maybe let them find a hidden potion of healing or fudge some dice rolls behind the screen. And if players really mess up and get killed, maybe change a few things when they retry the mission next time. The game allows for tabletop RPG-like improvising and is as such a good gateway to become an actual dungeon master for real tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. The bad. Though the rules are very accessible and simple, this also results in a flaw. The rules can be very unclear about certain specific situations, such as line of sight on page 14. The old edition and the new edition are pretty much the same, and the rule is that you draw an invisible straight line between the center of the square the spellcaster is on and the center of the square the target is on. And if that line does not cross a wall, closed door, hero, or monster, the target is declared visible even if the line just touches a corner or wall edge. So it can touch a corner. But in this case, here the elf and this orc have line of sight. But if I were to draw a line from the center of this square to the center of that square, that line would not just cross the corner of the wizard's square, it would actually clip through it a little. So it seems that these diagrams don't exactly follow the rule of drawing a straight line from the center of the square to the center of the target square. And if a monster blocks line of sight, then what happens if I open this door and there's a monster right behind it? In the first edition of the game, Zargon would place all miniatures and furniture in the room. In the new edition, this is really only explained when opening secret doors. On page 12, it says, as a hero, while you are moving, you may look down a corridor or through an open door. Looking gives you the opportunity to see what is directly within your line of sight. So technically, if a monster is behind the door blocking your line of sight, you would not see what's in that room. On page 16, it tells you how a hero searches for secret doors, and it says here that once the door is opened, Zargon places the items on the game board that are beyond the secret doorway. Once opened, the door cannot be closed. Now, this doesn't specify what happens if there is a monster directly behind the secret door, and it would suggest that that doesn't matter. So does it also not matter when opening a regular door? This was also not explained in the original rules because the North American version was pretty much just copy-pasted. Another example concerns pit traps. If a pit trap is found during his search, Zargon says the floor looks weak and points to the square where the trap is located. Zargon does not put a pit trap tile on the game board at this time. You only do that when a hero springs a pit trap without having searched for it, so then Zargon puts a pit trap tile on that square. A little bit later, on page 20, the rules explain how the dwarf disarms a trap. So it explains that, and it tells you here, note, a disarmed pit trap is considered to be a regular game board square, which is of course logical because if a pit trap is disarmed, the tile was never placed. So writing it that way might cause confusion and could, in my opinion, have been written better. The rules also talk about mind points, which reflect the hero's wisdom, intelligence, and resistance to magical influence. But otherwise, the rules make no mention of what they mean. There are 3 chaos spells that use mind points, and there are certain expansions that also use mind points. But what happens when mind points are reduced to 0? Can they be restored? Do they have any purpose other than those few dread spells? In such cases of doubt, players are meant to use their best judgment and decide an outcome. The game literally encourages players to make up their own scenarios and even rules and just go with it. This is, after all, a game system, and not everything is set in stone, but that can make the game feel a little unpolished, especially since this is a reprint. Also, like I mentioned earlier, most quests were just literally copied from the original North American quest book without checking if there were any errors or references that don't make sense in the new edition. Some quests, most notably in the Barbarian quest pack, had quests that required more doors than are available in the core game. And since the Hasbro reprint of this expansion was basically copy and pasted, those issues still exist. Or referring to a model that doesn't exist in the new edition, such as the orc with the large sword, which used to be this miniature, but obviously the new miniatures are completely different. You'd think someone could have checked for inconsistencies, but sadly they didn't, and so old mistakes were simply copied and completely new ones got added. Also, the original rule of having to roll 2d6s for movement is quite outdated. You could roll low and waste a turn simply because you can't reach a door or an enemy, or roll high when you don't need to. So many players have house ruled this to a fixed movement, just like the monsters have, or even a fixed number plus 1d6. The plate mail even takes away a movement die, making the hero wearing it frustratingly slow. To many, these questions are not a problem, and it certainly wasn't back in 1989, but to others it may seem like Avalon Hill and Hasbro simply didn't bother to write a watertight rule set. Especially after 32 years of existence with tons and tons of player feedback, house rules, and additions in the form of homebrew missions, spells, heroes, monsters, etc. And one of the biggest and perhaps best known repositories of HeroQuest resources and discussions is Ye Olde Inn, a site I can highly recommend visiting if you own this game or its successors. I've been a long-time member and contributor to this forum myself, even before I started my review channel. There is a lot to find there, plus the countless other resources on fan sites, Board Game Geek and YouTube. So why hasn't Hasbro delved into these invaluable resources and cherry-picked some rules improvements for this new edition? Perhaps they didn't have the funds, or they simply couldn't be bothered, but maybe they simply did not want to change a winning formula. The new edition is almost a carbon copy of the North American version of the game. I guess they just wanted to give fans what they wanted, a reprint of a much-loved classic with a few minor rules clarifications. But I feel they could have addressed more common rules questions and added a chapter or two with advanced rules to optionally use if you're an experienced player looking for a bit more of a challenge. A missed opportunity in my opinion. Fortunately, it does mean pretty much all of the homebrew material out there can be used with this new edition. The designs of the classic game borrow directly from Games Workshop's Warhammer Fantasy World and Realm of Chaos. Chaos Warriors, Fimir, and a Bloodthirster or Greater Demon of Khorne as the feared Gargoyle. The dog-faced demon with the typical helmet is unmistakable. Of course, Hasbro has had to move away from such designs as they are still owned by Games Workshop. So the Chaos Warriors and Sorcerer are now Dread Warriors and Sorcerer, and the Fimir are now abominations that look a lot like Lovecraftian Deep Ones, which in my opinion is a tad incongruous with the high fantasy theme of HeroQuest. But then again, Dungeons & Dragons also has Deep Ones, so why not? The Bloodthirster design has been replaced with a proper and more classic gargoyle.
This is an abomination. This is a gargoyle.
Which is fine, but perhaps less imposing or scary than a Greater Demon of Khorne. Will it come alive or not? So for fans of the original, these changes can take away a little of the old nostalgia, but works exactly the same for the gameplay. The box has inserts for everything except the tokens. Once punched, there is no dedicated slot for storing them. The expansions seem to have spots for them, but not the core box. You'll have to put them in a Ziploc baggie and stash them underneath one of the plastic trays. A small oversight. So in conclusion, the game has a lot of good stuff to offer, but could have been improved rules-wise in my opinion. It's accessible, it looks amazing, and is just plain good fun with a popular theme. So does it still hold up? I think it does. Even if you're not a longtime fan who already knows it's great and simply wants this new edition for nostalgia, this is great fun to play with friends or with your kids. The art is amazing, the components are great, and painting the minis can be a great joy too. It's a gateway game to actual role-playing games, and the cooperative aspect makes this enjoyable for everyone involved. If you're an experienced player looking for a challenging game with deep rules, you probably already know that this is not it. This is as basic as dungeon crawlers can get, but the huge fan community this game has proves it is still enjoyable to this day. Because the best thing about HeroQuest is that it's back in print. I hope you enjoyed my review, and if you did, please give it a like and subscribe for more. Check out my Patreon page if you'd like to support what I do. It's greatly appreciated. Big thanks to Hasbro for sending me a copy to review. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Board Game Heaven.